everyone, and welcome back to the Gaelic Lives podcast. You're very welcome to our Monday show, and we're looking back at a couple of games we had over the weekend. Of course, there was a couple called off too, which we'll reference later on. But first of all, there's only one place to start, Mal, and that's with Ballinderry. They upset the odds, I think it's fair to say. Beforehand, they were huge underdogs, and with about 20 minutes left, they're probably even bigger underdogs. But they somehow found a way. They turned it all around, and they're in an All-Ireland final now. It was some victory for them.
Yeah, it was, and they've told me to make sure I don't tip them for the final because I've tipped them to lose the last two games. So welcome to the world of predictions. But it was probably a wee bit like the Derry County final with Newbridge and Glen. Very soon into the game, you realise Ballinderry are on the money, and probably when the scoreline probably doesn't do them justice how dominant they were. Although, Sean, they did go 33 minutes without a score, which would be a concern. And then obviously they lost Shea Coleman and Niall O'Donnell to injury, and Niall O'Donnell seemed to be a hamstring. He seemed to pull up on one of his runs after half time. So that would be a worry with obviously just 8 days to go, but a brilliant one and an excellent all-round team performance. I suppose Daniel McKinless coming off the bench, of the 9 second half points Ballinderry scored, he was involved in 6 of them. And I remember chatting to him in the tunnel in Healy Park after the Ulster final, and he had his arm in a sling, and he was heading to the celebration. So a massive turnaround and a big impact from him in that second half. They probably don't win without that.
And that you mentioned that they go 33 minutes without a score.
Yeah.
I think it was 5-2 then with about 20 minutes left, and you just felt it. I was the same as you, Mal, watching it. I thought in the first half Ballinderry were doing okay. Now they were kicking some wides, and there was sometimes they kicked like big high balls into Ryan Bell, and it wasn't working, but they were doing okay. And then really before half time it looked like they weren't really going anywhere anymore, and Crokes got the first point of the second half, and it just felt like it was going to slip away. But there was a couple of big moments that stand out. I remember Lawn getting a good turnover. Ryan Bell kicked a point at one stage, and the whole cheering and fist to the crowd and everything else. And that was a big momentum swing. So from 3 points down, looking like they're just going to limp out of it. They got 5 points on the trot, and I think they outscored Stacks. Was it 9 points to 2 in the second half?
Yeah, it was a significant second half, Sean, and probably I think the only kick out that Ballinderry lost all day was Ben McKinless went long, and Armin Heinrich won the high ball. But whenever that move materialised, I think that's the one that Darren Lawn cut out, and I think substitute Jack Bell was even involved in that move all the way to Darren Lawn putting it over the bar. I think that was the one for 5-3, if my memory's right. And as you say, there was maybe a 7-minute spell where they get 5 points, and that turned everything. And obviously Daniel McKinless heavily involved in that. Rory Forbes, as much as he didn't score, he was always carrying the ball forward, and he was always making ground for them. And the further the game went on, the more Ryan Bell and Gareth McKinless come into it as well. So just a brilliant all-round performance. And even there was a stage whenever, like, Paddy Lane was one of their star players, and I think it was Ryan O'Neill was marking him with Darren Lawn sort of doubling up on him. And at one point in the second half, where Tiernan Ox, who was one of their lesser-known players, he's only onto the squad. We did an interview with him last week, and he made a turnover on Paddy Lane whenever there was only a point in it, and a score came off it within seconds. So there was all those wee moments, and they all involved something positive for Ballinderry. And Oisin Duffin did a great job, and Cian Purcell, who had scored 4 goals in the championship. So everything went right for them. And as I said earlier, the 4 points won, they were full value for it. And when you think of it, obviously the much documented thing where it was the 9th placed Kerry club versus Ballinderry would have been technically 13th with them being an intermediate in Derry. So a brilliant result. And and both clubs have all Ireland senior success. Like, they both have 13 county titles at senior level to their name. So 2 massive clubs who found themselves in intermediate, but I can't imagine them being back there anytime soon. And And obviously Ballinderry won't worry about that now. They'll be worried about getting the bus booked and the meals booked and all the bits and pieces ready for this weekend at Croke Park. So a massive occasion. And bearing in mind the time they won the All Ireland, it was played in Thurles against Nemo Rangers, because Croke Park was being renovated at that time. So now they get to Croke Park, and a marvellous occasion, and hopefully they can follow what the likes of Arva and Glen and Cullyhanna did last year.
And Mal, you mentioned Paddy Lane. I think it was Paddy Lane. He had a goal chance just before half time, and he decided to put it over the bar. Like, that was a huge turning point as well. And probably the way Stacks felt, the point was the right score, the right option at that stage. But if he sinks that in the net and suddenly, you know, they're 5 or 6 points down, that's a huge mountain to climb. But they're always in touching distance.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, it was probably the only time that Ryan O'Neill was caught. And, you know, Paddy Lane did really well to get in behind him. I think it was Heinrich put the ball in, one of those high balls. But if you watch back the footage, Aaron Mullen does so well. He comes back, he chases in. If Aaron Mullen doesn't chase back, Paddy Lane's got a shot at goal. But Mullen just comes back just in time, and Lane maybe lifts his head and sees an extra body in there and decides to go for a point. But you're right, Sean, and probably that was the spell. As much as they went that scoreless spell, I felt that wee spell before half time was the time whenever Ballinderry were probably struggling the most. And, you know, credit Darren Mullen, another unsung hero. Anybody watches Ballinderry, he's one of those people who ferries the ball from defence, really fit guy. He was involved in, I think, one of the scores. I think he might have been involved in Shane McCann's score at the end of the Derry game, if I'm right. I'm maybe getting the games mixed up, but he's been involved in a few big moments, and you just think he didn't chase that lost cause, and he, as I say, he converted a goal chance into a point chance for Paddy Lane.
And now I'll bring you in here because I know Mal said about Ballinderry's focus this week is booking buses and getting gear sorted and flags and everything else to head to Croke Park. But they've only 8 days to sort all this, and well, probably they've missed a couple of days celebrating there too. So it's a short turnaround. It's a very quick turnaround. And Mal mentioned a couple of boys, you know, picking up injuries and that. Like, it's going to be tough for Ballinderry.
Yeah, I think a team that books a place in All Ireland final deserves at least a fortnight to prepare themselves. And I suppose it's a wee bit inconsistent given that the senior teams in theory had a fortnight only for the larger conditions over the weekend. Errigal, if they keep off the cooks, will only have a week to prepare as well, unless they push back to All Ireland senior final. But there's nothing official or not yet, and I doubt it'll happen given the National Football League is only around the corner. But I assume last year that Cullyhanna and Arva were in All Ireland intermediate and junior finals, as you well remember, and I'd assume that presumably they got a fortnight, but they only got a week as well, so it must be the way it is at intermediate and junior level. But yeah, I think it is what it is. I suppose it's the age-old thing. Well, both teams are in the same boat type of thing, you know. So it's not really an advantage one way or the other. And these things get forgotten about very quickly when you win as well. Or if Ballinderry won All Ireland, they couldn't care less about how long they had to prepare for it.
Mal, them injuries you did touch on, what way are them boys looking, or how did you get any feelers about how are they going to be fit for this weekend, or I suppose we'll probably not know this Sunday.
I didn't really. I wasn't chatting to anybody at a family function and wasn't at the game. I was watching it just on the stream. But Shea Coleman seemed to pick up like an impact injury on the throw-in, and there was an attack. But when they came back, there was a lengthy stoppage. It looked like maybe somebody stepped on his ankle or something. So it didn't look major. But at the same time, at that time, maybe he just couldn't put full weight on it. As for Niall O'Donnell, he did. I think it was 2 minutes into the second half, he made a run, and I could see him. I watched his back. He was sort of holding his hamstring or holding the back of his leg, and he went on for an hour, maybe 6 or 7 minutes. But when you see him in the footage, he couldn't seem to run. So that would be a concern. And bearing in mind, he was one of the most influential players all through the championship. If he was to miss, it would be a huge loss for Ballinderry. But personally, you know, a young fella like Niall O'Donnell, who's a really promising player, to miss out on a big day would be unfortunate. So I'm sure the holy water and the ice baths and whatever other relics they can pull out of anywhere. I'm sure he'll maybe be in Wexford in the ice tanks or whatever needs done, but it's probably a race against time. The crack with hamstrings, it doesn't go away that handy.
Yeah, I'd say he'd be living in ice baths for the next couple of days, just to make sure he's right. But we had Niamh Padraig as well in action. While they eventually got their twinning final against Tara from London played. It was called off just before Christmas, and it was pushed back an hour at the weekend, just due to the weather and stuff. So they got it played, and Muff got through. So that's another Ulster team into the semi-finals.
Yeah, they got through, and it's bound to be a concern if you're over there, but it looked more slippy than anything than frozen on the footage that I was watching. But an excellent win for them. Cormac McColgan again with another massive performance. He kicked a couple of points, including the first one of the game, and was back, tracking back, picking balls out of the defence and getting forward. So he had a big game. Ciaran McColgan scored 1-3 and hit the crossbar, and Drew McKinney, I think he scored 4 goals in the Ulster and All Ireland series so far, and he got a couple of goals. But I think there was something like 4 or 5 points in at the stage when Tara was ticking over nicely, but they just pulled away. I suppose that second goal was the thing that broke the game itself. And they lost Ciaran Harkin, their full-back, to injury. He was carried off, and probably his recovery will be that wee bit more difficult, bearing in mind he probably had to spend the rest of the day in a bus or a train or a plane or whatever means they got there. So, and then Rory Hurl, who scored 2 or 3 points in the championship and would be a really good link man for them, he didn't play. I'm not sure the extent of his injury, but Kevin Lynch got a full game under his belt. And the same for Ciaran McColgan, probably their 2 main men through Ulster in terms of scores, but they actually only played in the final. They were the two main scorers through their whole season, but they've obviously got them fit at the right time. But they come up against the Cork champions on Sunday, and I'm sure they'll be hoping that everybody is fit and available. But they have loads of goals on their team, 3 goals in the Ulster final, 4 goals again, and I'm sure that's something the Cork men will be doing their homework on. But a brilliant all-round performance, and Johnny Toy sort of holds the thing together in around that centre of the defence. And they started without the regular cornerback, and then it seemed to be that the sweeper that they usually have, he had to play like a marking role, but it's hard to tell the difference in TV because you're not actually at the game. So I'm wondering, was that a change of tactic for Tara? But it was a very useful tactic. You saw it that day whenever they were playing College Land, the way he was able to sit back and mop things up. So maybe when they get to Parnell Park this weekend, there'll be a different sort of a plan. But if they can keep that goal threat going, they'll be hard to stop. And it's hard to beat a wee bit of belief and a bit of momentum with things going. So and obviously keeping the key players available and on the pitch.
Yeah, the goals are the big thing, Mal, because I know I was following it on Twitter, and they looked comfortable in the first half. They were always that couple of points ahead, but they went in at halftime 1-7-5 up. Now, if that's 7-5, the underdog's still hanging in there. You're still giving them a chance, but they got a goal before halftime. They got one straight after halftime, and that really, you mentioned the second goal, that really put the game to bed. It was probably only a case then of how much they were going to win by.
It was like you talked about the opening period. Like they just bossed the whole kick-out thing at a stage. Ronan Hoy and Drew McKinney won a few kick-outs on the wing, and Cormac McColgan was hard to get past in that middle channel as well. And then in the second half, when Tara started to go long, they were picking up breaking balls in around their own defence as well from long kick-outs. So Iskakeen more or less held all the aces all the way through, as you say, bar that spell when they needed the 2 goals to break the game. But and then probably the last 10, 15 minutes was probably done and dusted at that point, and that will probably be, I suppose, the frustrating thing, because that's whenever Ciaran Harkin went off injured. So, but again, they're a really exciting team when they get forward. Like they've got the perfect balance in the fact that they've got the pace of Ciaran McColgan, who loves to take people on, loves the space, and then you've Kevin Lynch, one of those big guys you can throw the ball into him whatever way you want. So that's that balance. But I'm sure they're just glad to get it played. Like, what sort of conversation would we be having this morning if that pitch was frozen again? And it probably comes back to the debate that I suppose Niall was chatting about there, about structures and fixtures, and if the seasons are condensed and there's so many games to be played, there's no room for games to be called off. So you sort of, and even McNulty talks about in Wednesday's podcast about the Sigerson. They had a Sigerson final played in Moycullen in an absolute bog, but they couldn't call it off because there's no room to play it. So that's the difficult thing sometimes.
Yeah, and of course, when we're on that point, I'll bring Niall back in to talk about postponed games. Obviously, Ergil's All-Ireland semi-final with Dr. Crokes was supposed to take place in Portlaoise on Sunday, and it was postponed. I've seen a few snaps and stuff. I think Wally Parkinson put up a picture of Portlaoise on Sunday morning. So it was the right call, and I suppose, in fairness, Niall, it was the right call, and it was made early. It gave both clubs 24 hours. Nobody would have travelled up to Portlaoise on the Saturday or anything. So it's tough because, as Mal says, the structures and everything means, postponing games, it leaves everything very cramped. But it was probably the right call, and it was made early.
Yeah, it had to be done, and it seems to me, and maybe it's just an imagination, it seems that there's terrible weather is playing its part and postponing matches more than in the past. The Throne Senior Championship final was postponed due to a storm. There was Storm Dara in the cusp only a couple of weeks ago. No, it wasn't a storm, but it was obviously snowy weather and whatnot, and I was reading an article about it, and it seems to be very much associated with climate change and whatnot, that these things are going to become more and more regular. Obviously, there's some people are very, very skeptical about the climate change talk, and that's not what we're here to debate and whatnot. But yeah, it just seems like every other week there's bloody storms of some description. But yeah, I think the good thing was that they made the call early. They wouldn't have wanted to make a call when people from Tyrone and Kerry were halfway up the road to the Midlands. I think it was particularly bad down and around the Kerry and whatnot, the roads and whatnot. So it was a decision that had to be made. I was chatting in there to lad over the weekend, and yeah, the people were frustrated about the whole thing. That was on Friday, I think it was. When there was chat already that the game might be postponed. So at least he didn't drag their heels completely and made the call at a relatively early juncture. It's just one of those things, and it would have been farcical if the game had went ahead. So it's good they made the decision, and I suppose there is consistency as well because they called off the Cruella game too. So those sides will be an advantage regardless of who ends coming through those respective semi-finals.
You can probably understand the frustration, Niall, from the clubs. You've spent, all Christmas, the last couple of weeks, last couple of days building up to this, and suddenly 24 hours before the match it's called off. But as you say, at least both semis were called off, so at least in the final there's no one team will have that extra week rest or anything. It's going to be a level playing field.
Yeah, and Eric will have been here before, as I was saying there 2 minutes ago. The senior final in Tyrone was postponed over 5 days, I think, just because the weather was initially down for Sunday, and then he played it on the Friday evening, if my memory serves me correctly. And Eric were absolutely brilliant in the final from start to finish as well. They only won by a point or two, but they were, I think even though Stard and Tulloch supporter were admit that Ergil were deserving victors, so at least they have that recent experience of dealing with this thing under their belts,
And Mal, just before we wrap up, I know you were at the couple Ulster finals that were played last week. The Ulster minor hurling final in Ballinderry and the football final in St. Paul's. So we had a few interviews from those two finals on last week's pod, but I suppose just give us a wrap up of the games and how everything went.
Yeah, well, the hurling one was actually last year. Sean, it was the New Year's Eve one. Glenarath and Glenravel, they amalgamate at minor level, and they've won a Fela coming up through the ranks, and they were 2-6 to 6 points winners over Lavey. Probably deserving enough winners, albeit Lavey, when they had the breeze in the second half, did miss quite a few chances before Oisín Gillen's goal sort of put the tin hat on it with virtually the last play. But Oran O'Connor had got the first half goal, and it was the difference for most of the game. and Tiernan Malloch was brilliant at fullback for Lavey, and likewise Colin Ward in the defence for the Glens. But it's a team that has been coming, and from chatting to a few people involved in the club, they were saying they just put in a serious amount of preparation, and they had a period their training because there's a big gap between the Antrim Championship and the Ulster Championships, so they got that on the money. So the first time they ever won that, and that's the 10th time an Antrim team has won it. So a big occasion for them. And then the following day, the first game of the new year, always is at St Paul's, where Four Masters retained their title. As much as Magherafelt could have won it at the end, it probably would have been a snatch job, albeit they kept hanging in there. They were sort of handicapped from the point of view they lost Keelan Higgins to injury from the Clan Erin game, and then Michael Higgins went off injured, so that was a big blow to them. But after a very prominent start from them, they were 3-0 up, then they were 4-1 up, but the quarter before half time changed everything. Four Masters were against the breeze. They created 3 goal chances, even though they didn't take any of them. Tomas Carr, Turlock Carr, Callum McRae, and Kevin Balloon started to get a run at the game, and it was 4-4 at half time. And then, if anything, the breeze actually changed at half time. Then the goal, I think it was Dara Griffin, got the final touch for a high ball. Tomas Carr, I thought, was the best player on the pitch. He actually played it full forward for the first 5 minutes, came out, put the ball in, Tiernan McRae's flick, and it ends up in the back of the net from Dara Griffin. So that gave they were then in control. They owned the game for the most of the second half. They were 4 or 5 points up at stages. Then they missed a couple of chances that would have sealed the game, and if they had lost it, that's where it would have been lost, because Magherafelt came back really strongly. Rory Small got a point, Conal Higgins got 3 points, and then it came down to that last play, and it was deflected. It was deflected for a 45, and the referee didn't deem there was any time left to play, and that was the last play. And back-to-back titles, and probably a big factor in the Four Masters' success, Sean, is a lot of them are involved in the Abbey vocational schools. 13 of them were playing in the same McCrory Cup team, which would have brought a wee bit more togetherness to them over the competition. And I think they play St Coleman's now this week. So great times for Four Masters. They were our Club of the Year a few years ago, and you can see why.
Yeah, some going, especially at that age level, for Four Masters to retain their title. Well, that's all we have for Monday's show, folks. We'll be back later in the week. As Mal referenced earlier, he caught up with Enda McNulty and chatted through a range of different subjects. So that'll be out later in the week. So make sure to keep an eye out for that, and keep an eye out on all our social media pages for the build up to Ballinderry's All-Ireland final and everything else that is happening this week. So thanks to Niall and Mal, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll be back later in the week, and then of course next Monday as well with our usual roundup show. So speak to everybody then.